Australia's immigration story starts in 1770 when Captain Cook charted the east coast. 18 years later, in 1788, the first fleet arrived, the beginning of the European settlement. Convicts were often arrested and sent to Australia just for stealing a loaf of bread. Over the next century, around 160,000 convicts were sent to Australia from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. The early culture was strongly Anglo-Saxon and Celtic, though a small number of Germans arrived early on, adding to the European mix. This culture had deep roots influenced by both Roman civilization, which brought Christianity, law to the British Isles, and Germanic traditions from the Anglo-Saxon settlers. When European and Aboriginal groups would come into conflict, the Europeans with superior weaponry and strategy would almost always win. But often these two groups would stay away from each other, and the Aboriginals would instead fight with other tribes. Then came the gold rush of the 1850s and 1860s. Around 600,000 new settlers came, mostly from Britain. Around 40,000 Chinese also arrived looking for gold. They often stuck together in large groups, which worried many Europeans who feared cultural change. After the gold rush, most Chinese miners went back home, but around 10,000 stayed and gradually integrated into Australian society. By the year 1900, the population of Australia had reached 4 million, with a vast majority being Anglo-Saxon Celtic peoples. In 1901, the White Australia policy was passed. The majority of Australians supported the policy for several different reasons. Firstly, to maintain the Anglo-Saxon Celtic European culture and people. They believed if mass Chinese or Pacific Islander workers were to come in, it would cause cultural division. Chinese or most non-Europeans had a lower standard of living as well, and they would undercut the Australian workers who wanted higher income, and cause Australians to work for less, and in worse conditions. Chinese workers were used to dangerous or bad working conditions, meaning Australian businesses would pay the Chinese workers less and make the working conditions worse, leaving Australian-born Europeans without work. After the Great Depression, birth rates had dropped, and following World War II, Australia opened its doors to displaced Europeans. Large numbers of Dutch, Germans, Greeks, Italians, Poles, and others arrived. These migrants generally integrated well, sharing a European standards of living and Christian background, even if they were from different denominations. They worked, built lives, and contributed to the economy, while enriching Australia's culture with their own traditions. By the mid-20th century, attitudes towards migration were shifting. The newly formed United Nations and post-war global politics brought in ideas about equality and human rights. Communists and left-wing publications began campaigning against the White Australia policy, labeling it and right-wing groups racists and fascists. Over time, this led to its dismantling. After the Vietnam War, which was fought by the USA and Australia, over 100,000 Chinese refugees, sometimes called boat people, were accepted into Australia. Many formed close-knit communities, but many didn't learn English or fully integrate into broader Australian society. From the 1970s through to the 1990s, around 50,000 Lebanese people migrated to Australia, many fleeing the civil war. Christian Lebanese generally integrated more smoothly than Muslim Lebanese, who often kept a stronger cultural and religious identity. Chinese migration increased again in the 1990s, with arrivals accelerating through the 2000s and 2010s. Today, about 1.4 million Australians have Chinese ancestry. Many of those migrants work in high-skilled, high-pay fields like IT, medicine, and technology. They often are given these jobs over Australians. Filipino migration began in the 1990s, and today there are around 300,000 people of Filipino heritage in Australia. Because many Filipinos already speak English and share a Catholic Christian background, they generally integrate well, while keeping some traditions and languages at home. Since the 90s, African-born people started to migrate to Australia. Today there are more than 350,000 black Africans living in Australia. This started from the Sudanese, Ethiopian, Somalian refugees coming to Australia. These refugees had a difficult time integrating as they did not speak English and came from a dangerous, crime-ridden country. This is important as in Victoria, African Australians, mostly South Sudanese, made up about 19% of young people in custody, despite being around 0.5% of the youth population. This shows that these youths coming from Africa are not integrating into our peaceful, low-crime country. On the other hand, there are also many skilled African migrants who come through student and skilled worker programs. These people generally integrate well. They speak English, work in higher paying jobs, and contribute to the economy, but there's a downside. They stay in Australia permanently after their studies. It means that some of the brightest, most capable people from African countries never go back home to help build their own nations. This brain drain is one of the many reasons why African countries continue to struggle with poverty and underdevelopment. South African migration is a unique case. Around 190,000 South Africans live in Australia today, most of European descent. They tend to integrate very well due to a shared language, religion, culture, and often work in high-income jobs. From the 2000s, Indian migrants have been coming to Australia, and there are now over 1 million Indians living in Australia. The Albanese government intends to import up to another 500,000 more. Indians don't integrate well as they retain their home languages and often stay in their own communities. Many who come are Hindu and don't integrate into the Australian Christian religion. After the Lebanese Civil War, Australia saw more Muslim migration from countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. According to the 2021 census, there are about 800,000 Muslims in Australia, though the real number is more likely closer or even above 1 million today. Islam is very different to Australia's historically Christian culture, and throughout history there have been many conflicts between Christian and Muslim civilizations. Christian persecution is still common in many Muslim-majority countries today. This is why large-scale Muslim migration to Australia is risky and dangerous. Unfortunately, the Australian government does not collect or release crime statistics broken down by religion or ethnicity for Muslims or Arabs. This means it's hard to know the exact figures for crime or incarceration rates. However, some reports suggest that Muslims are involved in crime about 3 times their share of the population, and in the UK, Afghan migrants are 22 times more likely to be convicted of a sexual crime than British nationals. Finally, since 2020, migration to Australia has been at a record high, almost double the amount in a small time span than any other time in history. With our terrible economy, housing market, and job market, it is irresponsible for our governments to let mass amounts of people in, especially since many could be dangerous. This is my breakdown of historical migration to Australia from a nationalist perspective. Thank you for watching. Long live Australia.